Number 10. The babysitter, also known as the Oakland County child killer, murdered at least 4 children in the late 1970s. 2 boys and 2 girls were kidnapped, then murdered over a period of 13 months. Their bodies were left throughout Oakland. There were other victims as well. The deaths triggered a murder investigation which was the biggest in US history at the time. The killer's profile was developed because the person seemed to be able to gain the trust of children. It was believed that the serial killer was possibly a police officer, doctor, or a priest. The killer was someone who was familiar with the area and probably lived alone, possibly living in a remote area because they were able not to create any suspicion amongst friends, family, or neighbours. The horrific murders remain unsolved and the killer or killers have never been identified. They are still living amongst us. 9. Over all the years since 1996, 16 people have been murdered by the same killer. Body remains have been found as recently as 2013. This is a photograph taken near to where the first body was found. This killer is known as the Long Island serial killer. The unknown killer is thought to have a detailed knowledge of law enforcement techniques and perhaps even ties to law enforcement which have helped him to get away with the murders. The killer is still living amongst us. 8. In India from 1985 to 1988, there were 13 homeless people murdered. The killer, he or she, would find a victim sleeping alone in a desolate area. Then the victim's head was caved in with a single stone weighing about 30 kilograms. The media called the murderer the Stone Man. To this day the crimes remain unsolved. The killer is still living amongst us. 7. Between 1968 and 1985 in Florence, Italy, 8 couples, that's 16 people in love, were brutally slaughtered. The victims were making out in cars when they were shot, all with the same type of pistol and bullets, then stabbed. The women's bodies finally mutilated. 2 people were jailed, but many people believe their convictions were not safe. So the true monster of Florence is still living amongst us. 6. In February 2009, a woman was walking her dog. The dog found a bone, which led to the discovery of a mass grave. The remains of 16 different women were found buried in a large desert area of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was discovered that all the women were prostitutes and drug takers, and the murders were believed to have been committed by a single serial killer, known as the West Mesa Bone Collector. The victims ranged in age from 15 to 32, and all disappeared from 2003 to 2005. The media has called these killings Albuquerque's crime of the century. No official suspect has ever been identified despite several men being connected to the bone dumping area. There's no way to connect any of these suspects because there's no witnesses or even a single strand of DNA. The killer is still living amongst us. 5. From February 2007 to August 2008, 13 gay men were murdered in Brazil. The victims were aged between the ages of 20 and 40. They were all shot in the head. The media called the serial killer the Rainbow Maniac. He is believed to be responsible for several other murders as well. A suspect who used to be a police officer was actually arrested but was never convicted. So these disgusting homophobic crimes still remain unsolved. The Rainbow Maniac is still living amongst us. 4. The Connecticut River Valley Killer is an American serial killer responsible for over 7 stabbing murders, mostly in and around Claremont, New Hampshire. From 1978 to 1987, he was known for his frenzied attacks, stabbing his victims dozens of times. Late in the evening on August the 6th, 1988, this 22-year-old woman was 7 months pregnant. She stopped to buy soda from a vending machine. The pregnant woman noticed a Jeep parked next to her. The driver approached her open window and asked her if the payphone was working. Then he quickly grabbed her and pulled her from the car. After a struggle, he stabbed her 27 times before driving away and leaving her to die. Fortunately, the baby survived. The dying mum was able to provide authorities with a sketch and the first 3 characters of the murderer's license plate. However, the killing stopped after this brutal, cowardly attack and the case became cold. It was thought the serial killer could have been even responsible for servicing the drink vending machines. No one has been found guilty for these vicious murders. The Connecticut Valley Killer may still be living amongst us. 3. In South Korea from 1986 to 1991, a serial killer murdered 10 women. The victims' ages ranged from 71 to 14 years young. They were all gagged and murdered. Each woman was strangled to death with their own clothes. Evidence led to a description of the suspect, a man in his late teens, early 20s. Police officers involved spent 2 million days on the case. The total number of suspects also grew to a massive total count of over 21,000 individuals. Then 13 years later in 2004, a college student was murdered, which ignited interest that the serial killer had returned to murder again. Today, this serial killer is still living amongst us. 2. The US highway serial killers. In 2004, murder patterns were discovered due to many bodies being dumped off the US highways. Over 450 female victims were found. The majority were prostitutes picked up at truck stops or service stations. Subsequently, long-haul truck drivers became the first suspects. At least 10 suspects have been arrested in connection with some of the murders, but unfortunately, hundreds of these killings remain unsolved. And you know what? More murders occur every single month. Apart from truck drivers, the FBI believe that these killers may be people who need to use the highways every day due to their occupations. The red dots on this map mark where bodies or remains have been found along highways over the past 30 years. Highway serial killers are still living amongst us. Number 1. In the UK, chilling evidence shows that undetected mass murderers are responsible for butchering 7 people every year. The serial killers who haven't been caught yet are likely to carry out their murder sprees for years without being detected. An average of 60 murder cases across the UK go unsolved every year. Research indicates there are at least 2 unidentified active serial killers in the UK at any one time. The FBI estimates that at any given moment there are between 25 and 50 serial killers in the United States. Right now, serial killers are still living amongst us. Here's some of my other videos which will definitely freeze your spine. Don't forget to slam your finger down on that subscribe button. My name is Bleeding Critic. Explore, interact and remember that you have the right to remain terrified and disturbed.